Hey, hi, and hello. Chris here. Thanks for stopping by. Today's video was actually suggested by a viewer of mine a little while ago, so thank you. And it was a case I hadn't ever heard of. And after doing my research, I'm in disbelief as to what happened. Before I get into this video, I do want to warn you that this case is about the murder of a young toddler. So if you are sensitive to the topic, I advise you not to watch, as this story is tragic, violent, and very disturbing. I'm only going to cover some of the parts of the story. Some details are probably just better left not talked about. There are a handful of documents online that go into the details if you are really that curious. I mean no disrespect to the victim or anyone involved when doing these stories. I compiled them from information that I found from various sources on the internet. So if I do have a fact wrong, I do apologize. And feel free to let me know in the comment section below. Today, we will discuss the story on how killers Robert Thompson and John Venables led their 2-year-old victim, James Bulger, past dozens of witnesses to his tragic death. James Patrick Bulger, also known as Jimmy, was born on March 16, 1990. He was just shy of turning 3 years old at the time of his murder. He lived in Liverpool, England, with his mother Denise and his father Ralph. He was a friendly, cute, lovable little boy and just full of energy. The afternoon of February 12, 1993, John Venables and Robert Thompson, having skipped school that day, ended up at the New Strand Shopping Center in an area near Liverpool. At the mall, the boys wandered shop to shop, stealing various items, and at some point, which still remains unclear to this day, the boys decided to steal someone's child. Now, James Bulger was not the first child that the boys had tried to abduct. It is stated that a woman inside a TJ Hughes department store noticed that 2 boys were trying to get the attention of her 2 children. Just moments later, her 3-year-old daughter and 2-year-old son were missing. The frantic mother quickly found the daughter, and when asked where the brother was, the young daughter said, "Gone outside with the boys." The woman ran outside where she found her son being called by Venables and Thompson to follow them. When Venables saw the mother, he froze in fear, told the boy to go back to his mother, and then they took off. Shortly after that failed abduction, Venables and Thompson were hanging around a snack kiosk when they noticed James Bulger standing by the door of a butcher shop. It was approximately 3:40 p.m. Denise, James's mother, was momentarily distracted when she let go of James's hand to get money from her purse to pay for the meat she was buying. It only took a minute for the boys to get the toddler's attention and to lure him away. Venables took James's hand and they disappeared into the crowded mall. It was later discovered through CCTV footage that it shows the 3 of them leaving the mall at 3:42 p.m. Literally just minutes it took for them to get the boy out of the mall. Now Denise, she was frantic and was panicking now that she could not find James. She had contacted the mall security and described what her son was wearing and what he looked like. And using the mall's loudspeakers, the mall personnel announced the boy's name in hopes that someone had seen him. You know, there were toy shops and sweet shops in and around the mall, so they thought maybe he had just wandered into a nearby store. By 4:15 p.m., no one had come forward. to say that they had seen him or anything else. And so at that time, the police were contacted. Meanwhile, with the search underway, Venables and Thompson had left the mall with James. The toddler had been crying for his mother, but the boys ignored him and led him to a secluded area near a canal. Now, the three boys had been seen walking around by dozens of people. Nobody did anything. Many of the witnesses later on admitted that James looked scared and distressed. Some even saw the older boys punch and kick the toddler. At the canal, John and Robert dropped James on his head and left him on the ground crying. A woman passing by noticed this, but did nothing. With bruises and cuts on his forehead, the two older boys tried to cover this up by putting the hood of his jacket over James's head, but people later on admitted that they could still see the injuries on his face. And one person actually saw a cut on James's face. But once again, nobody did anything. The boys had wandered around buildings, shopped, and even walked down one of Liverpool's busiest streets. Witnesses later on remember seeing at some point James laughing with the boys, while other witnesses remember seeing him screaming for his mother. One person saw James being kicked in the ribs, but did not do anything. A woman looking out her window has seen Thompson shake and punch James, but she pulled her curtains closed and did not do anything. An elderly woman has seen James crying. She noticed all his injuries and approached the boys and asked what was wrong. Could this be the woman to finally help James? The two older boys said, "We just found him at the bottom of the hill." The woman has simply told the two boys to take James to a nearby police station. While she was concerned, another witness had told her that she had seen James laughing. So both witnesses basically just assumed that there was nothing really wrong. It wasn't until later that night, when she saw the news coverage of James's disappearance, she phoned the police and stated that she had regretted not doing anything. Another woman, concerned when she saw James with the boys, told Venables and Thompson that she would take the child to the police station herself. But when she asked a nearby lady to look after her daughter while she did, the woman refused. I mean, if the woman was that concerned, why not just take her daughter with her to the police station to take James there? It absolutely makes no sense. The amount of people who saw or had interactions with the trio that were concerned and did absolutely nothing is incredibly outrageous. It didn't stop there. The trio had walked into different stores and had talked to different staff members. And it is stated that although the staff was suspicious of the two older boys, nobody ever did anything or say anything. When they arrived at the railroad, sometime between 5:45 and 6:30 p.m., the brutal torture of James Bulger began. It would ultimately end in his tragic death. Venables and Thompson had stolen some blue paint from the shopping mall. They had thrown some in James's left eye. They kicked him, threw bricks and stones at him, and stuffed batteries in his mouth. The older boys had hit James over the head with a 22-pound iron bar, which had resulted in 10 skull fractures. He was so badly battered that authorities later on said that there was absolutely no way they could tell which one was the fatal blow. In total, James Bulger, only 2 years old, sustained 42 injuries to his face and his body. A forensic pathologist later on concluded that James was dead at this point when Venables and Thompson had placed James's body on the train tracks, maybe in hopes to make it look like an accident. The two boys had left the scene before the train had come along and severed the toddler in two. The next day, the search for James Bulger was still underway. Everyone in and around the area was looking for James. Interviews were being done, searching of the canal was being done, but it all led to nothing. The police finally got a hold of the CCTV footage from the mall, and they could not believe their eyes. The CCTV footage is usually always pretty grainy and sometimes hard to make out, but they could clearly see that James was being led away by two boys. Denise, the mother, confirmed it was James by the description of the clothing he was wearing that day, the day that he disappeared. And like with most missing children cases, the police released the CCTV images to the media. The story went nationwide and the search for James increased. When his parents saw the CCTV image of James with the two boys, they almost sighed in relief. The father, Ralph, stated, quote, "I looked at Denise and smiled with relief. He's gonna be all right, Denise. He's with two young kids. He's gonna be all right." End quote. The reason that it was speculated that they figured that things would be okay was the fact that he was with two young boys. And it's not like he was being walked away by an adult male. They just thought the boys were playing a prank or a game or something. Unfortunately, 2 days later after the disappearance, the search ended when 4 children discovered James's body on the railway track, just 200 yards away from the closest police station. And I can only imagine the images, probably still haunting them to this day, of what the 4 children had seen. During the investigation, they found many items at the crime scene, including the blue paint that was used. Knowing that the CCTV footage showed 2 young boys, the police checked nearby schools and started looking at attendance records. And this caused various children to be identified as potential killers. A phone call came in, anonymously, that implicated John Venables and Robert Thompson. The caller reported that not only had the boys been missing from school that Friday, but that she herself had seen blue paint on the sleeve of Venables' jacket. So now the police went to go talk to the boys. They discovered blood on Thompson's shoes and blue paint, just as the caller had said, on Venables' jacket. Both boys were arrested. And at the time, they were just 10 years old. 10 years old. During the police interviews, both John Venables and Robert Thompson turned on one another. But after several days of questioning, John Venables finally confessed. Quote, "I did kill him. What about his mom? Will you tell her I'm sorry?" End quote. Now, Robert Thompson continued to deny everything, but in the end, he totally messed up when he told Detective Sergeant Phil Roberts exactly what James had been wearing that day. Robert remains so nonchalant, completely unfazed through the whole process, that the press dubbed him as the boy who did not cry. Now, John and Robert were both charged, but because they were minors, their identities had been held back from the public, and it wasn't until later that their names had been finally released. It was 9 months later when the trial began. I'm only going to touch on it because, like many others, this trial and all the appeals and such went on for quite a while. The people outside the courthouse were outraged at this horrific murder, and you could hear people shouting, "Kill the bastards," and "A life for a life." Court-appointed psychiatrists had determined that the 2 boys had known right from wrong and that they weren't considered sociopaths, but they could never figure out any motives for the murder of James Bulger. And to this day, nobody has ever been able to figure out a motive. John Venables and Robert Thompson were convicted of murder, making them the youngest to be convicted of that crime in Britain in 250 years. With standard protocol for young offenders, they were sentenced to juvenile hall for just 8 years. Only 8 years for this brutal, senseless murder of a child. During those 8 years, the boys were to be rehabilitated and to attend therapy and then later on reassessed. If they did not seem to be a danger to society, they would be released. And by all accounts, John Venables and Robert Thompson showed no violent or troublesome behaviors while in juvenile hall. In 2001, at age 18, both boys were released. Due to public fury that surrounded this case and the trial, John Venables and Robert Thompson were given completely new identities upon their release. And as of today, while it is thought that Robert Thompson, name and location obviously unknown now, is believed to be adjusting back into society and living a quiet life, that cannot be said about John Venables. In 2010, he was arrested and sent back to prison for downloading child pornography with explicit images of abuse on male toddlers. He was eligible for parole in 2013 and was released. He was given a new identity again. In November of 2017, John Venables was once again charged and sent back to prison for being in possession of the same kind of images that were found on his computer the first time. He was sentenced to 3 years. 2020. The parole board confirmed it was determining whether a hearing needed to take place to decide if he should be released again. There is suspected monthly backlog of more than 1,000 cases due to the coronavirus outbreak. With restrictions on Venables' current name or anything else that could possibly lead to his identification, it will remain a secret when his case is heard. Just a side note, in 2018, 60 Minutes Australia published a 13-minute video about this case, and it's actually quite good. I'll post the link in the description box below if anybody would like to check it out. I watch and listen to a lot of true crime, and this has got to be one of the worst ones I have come across. I am not a parent. I am not even going to try to pretend I understand the pain and the agony that his parents must have went through. James Bulger was just a toddler. The killers, they were just 10-year-old boys. So tragic. And that's it for today's story. Please take care of yourselves and be safe. Lots of love, hope, and prayers from Calgary, and we will chat with you soon. Bye.